Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Bennett, for being here today. The threat of disinformation, weaponizing information against the United States and our allies to divide us, divide our citizens, is on the rise. And I think we all feel that. It's especially so because we all have access to one of these now, so citizens and policymakers all have access to that through social media or other sorts of platforms. But the idea that our adversaries would try to use disinformation to divide us is not new. That was certainly something, for example, the Soviet Union prioritized during the Cold War as an element of their statecraft to destabilize the United States and our allies at the time. And I believe that in 1980, for example, there was a conservative estimate the Soviet Union spent $3 billion on disinformation campaigns as part of their overall strategy. With an increasingly aggressive China and Russia, we've entered into what seems like or feels like a new Cold War, and certainly it's true that we have, for the first time in our history, two near-peer nuclear competitors that are competing against us, and we see the spread of this disinformation. When you and I spoke in my office last week, you emphasized the need for more resources for U.S. AGM to compete against China and Russia. I think you described that China alone is outspending the U.S. 10-1 with regard to their campaigns. How much did the U.S. spend back during the Cold War against the Soviet Union? If the Soviet Union was spending $3 billion, do you know ballpark what was the U.S. spending to be able to counter that?
Yes, Senator. As soon as I left your office, I went back and we looked to our research department to see if we could figure out something like that. I don't have the exact figures here in front of me at the moment, but it was very similar to the ratio that we have today. And so one of the lessons from that could be that the advantages that we have in terms of providing trusted, believable, independent news and information is actually a great asset that enables us to do it much more efficiently. I would suggest that we are now not just facing one powerful adversary in Russia. We are facing several in Russia, China, and Iran. And China and Iran in particular are very, very skillful in using technology to help both close off their own areas and reach into other areas. So I think you get two results from that information that the ratio is probably pretty close to what it is today. One is that we have something to offer. We have a weapon that's worth using and deploying. And the second is that we had a certain ratio that's the same facing one major adversary, whereas today we face at least three and increasing technological hurdles to leap over.
So what lessons can we draw from the previous Cold War against the Soviet Union that allowed us to be successful? I mean, ultimately the Soviet Union fell apart, and we certainly worked on getting our message out then. What lessons can we draw from that to apply to today's scenario?
You know, one of the things is, I'm sure many of you have traveled around various parts of the world, and one of the things I tell people I'd like them to have the opportunity 50 years from now to have people say about what we're doing today, what people say about what we were doing then. Virtually any country you travel to, you will find people coming up to you and saying, I got hope from Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, which are the two ones working there. We kept on believing we could win this. We could break out of this. I learned English. I moved to a different country. I've had a career. We had the blankets over our heads. This was a tremendously powerful tool that we had in telling people objective news information. And it was the fact that it was objective and believable, and the information they were getting from their own countries was not. We face that identical situation today, so our critical advantage still remains our independence and our believability. And I believe that, 50 years from now, we're going to have people coming up to us and saying, you're the reason I believe that we were all going to get through this, and the information we were hearing from Russia and China was not correct.
Mm-hmm. So are there other tactics, though, that we could learn from the old Cold War that we should be applying today?
One of the tactics is we should be working technologically extremely rigorously, and through our Open Technology Fund is one way we absolutely will doing that, to get into closed environments. The environments are closing rapidly around the world, and not just in China, not just in Iran, not just in Russia, but in many, many other markets. but the lessons we can learn from the Cold War, given the state of the technology available to us in those days, we were equally shut out of those markets. As a matter of fact, I think in many places, we didn't even know if anyone was listening until after those countries, the countries fell and people were able to get in and see and hear. In Albania, for instance, I traveled to Albania a couple of years ago, and I don't think we had a very good idea of what our audience was, and it turned out that our audience was massive and very, very profoundly affected by it. So my lesson that I would draw is that we should not be afraid of the closed markets, that we still have something to offer, but we do need to do everything we can to get our news and information into those markets despite the fact that they're closed.
All right, well, thank you, Ms. Benham. Mr. Chairman?
Thank you.